She used to sit at the edge of his bed after reading to him. Her hand would gently smooth down his hair. "You don't need to yell to be heard, Jalen," she would say. "No matter what, speak with honor, even when the world tries to take that away." He could almost feel her fingers on his forehead again. He squeezed his eyes shut. Morning came with a metallic clang and orders barked too early. He barely touched his breakfast. A guard came by. "You're being arraigned today," he said flatly. Jalen stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his pants. "Can I call my mum?" he asked. "She wasn't reachable. Try after court," the guard muttered. Jalen's heart sank. He had tried twice the day before. Each time, the line disconnected or no one picked up. "What about a lawyer?" Jalen asked. "You'll get one. Maybe. Public defender's tied up this morning. Might be late. If I were you, I'd plead out. It's easier that way." Jalen didn't answer. He was escorted to a holding room beside the courtroom, where others waited in silence or nervous chatter. He looked at the other boys. Some looked like they'd done this before. For them, this was routine. For him, it was a storm. A paper was handed to him with a checkbox. Plea, guilty or not guilty. Underneath, it read, "Waiving counsel not advised." Jalen stared at it. His hands shook. His thoughts raced. What if his mother couldn't come? What if no one ever heard his side? What if the slap meant nothing to them? Then her voice returned to him. "Speak with honor." He ticked the box. Not guilty. He checked the line. Will represent self. And he signed his name, letters trembling but firm. Jalen folded his hands and waited to be called into court, not as a scared boy, but as someone who still believed truth could be louder than power. The county juvenile courtroom buzzed with tension. Though the main attention was meant for a high-profile gang-related case later in the afternoon, the seats were already full. Journalists, observers, and a few curious community members packed the gallery. Security was tight, cameras were restricted, but word had spread that a teen was standing trial for assaulting a police officer. A side door opened with a harsh clank, and Jalen was led in. He was small compared to the bailiff beside him. The bruising on his cheek hadn't fully faded, and the red mark near his jaw was still visible under the courtroom's sterile lighting. His wrists were bound tightly in cuffs, even though he didn't resist. He looked out at the sea of faces, most uninterested, some whispering. He caught the eye of a woman in the front row who quickly looked away, uncomfortable. The judge, James McCallum, a weary man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and glanced over the folder before him. He let out a quiet sigh. Another black teen. Another resisting arrest charge. He had seen this 100 times. Still, he tried to appear neutral as he addressed the courtroom. Docket number 271, Jalen Brooks. Charges include resisting arrest, failure to comply, and attempted assault on a peace officer. Jalen said nothing, his hands shaking slightly as he stood at the defense table. No lawyer sat beside him. Just the empty chair and a stack of papers he couldn't decipher. The judge looked at him briefly, then turned his attention to the prosecution. Officer Briggs took the stand confidently, dressed in uniform and cleaned up for court. His voice carried weight as he spoke. "Your Honor, the suspect was acting suspiciously in a commercial area known for illegal activity. When I approached him, he immediately became hostile. He raised his voice, clenched his fists, and lunged at me. I responded according to training, using minimal force to de-escalate." He paused. "At one point, I genuinely feared for my safety." The courtroom murmured slightly. The prosecutor followed up with, "And you had prior complaints filed against you, any of them substantiated?" Briggs shook his head. "All resolved, none relevant to this case." The prosecutor then queued up the only video evidence. 30 seconds of shaky footage showing Jalen raising his voice, followed by the officer stepping forward quickly. The slap wasn't captured. The angle wasn't right. There was no sound. Judge McCallum watched the footage and leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. The prosecutor turned toward Jalen, addressing the court. "Your Honor, This doesn't need to drag on. The defendant is young. If he apologizes today and accepts responsibility, we're willing to recommend community service and counseling instead of full sentencing. We're giving him a chance. The judge nodded slowly. That sounds like a fair route. Mr. Brooks, would you like to accept the offer? Jalen glanced down at the table, then slowly stood. He hadn't spoken a word yet. The silence in the room shifted. The judge looked at him more directly now, sensing hesitation. His voice came out low at first, but clear. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to tell the truth. The courtroom froze. Some in the gallery sat back. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. I didn't resist. I didn't lunge. I didn't threaten anyone. Jalen continued, his voice steadier now. I helped a woman who fell. I was walking home from school. That's all. I tried to speak. He hit me before I could finish a sentence. The judge blinked. Mr. Brooks, do you understand that you're representing yourself, that this is not a debate club? I understand, Jalen said. But you asked if I wanted to accept a lie. I don't. I'd rather speak what happened, even if no one listens. The judge looked down again, perhaps reconsidering. The gallery remained quiet. Officer Briggs stared at Jalen with disdain, but said nothing. And just like that, the case no one expected to matter suddenly had everyone watching. The air inside the courtroom had grown dense with silence. Jalen stood at the small podium reserved for self-represented defendants, hands lightly gripping the edge. A thin sheen of sweat coated his brow, but his voice had found its strength. He had asked for access to his GPS data, and surprisingly, the judge allowed it. A school staff member had emailed the court verifying Jalen's attendance at the tournament and his departure time. The timestamps showed him walking away from the building minutes before the alleged incident. The map showed a straight path home. He looked up at Officer Briggs, seated confidently on the witness stand. You said I was loitering in a known area for illegal activity. Yes, Briggs answered. But my GPS shows I left school and was on the sidewalk for less than 4 minutes before you arrived. And that alley, it's not known for anything. It's next to a senior centre and a bookstore. Briggs shifted slightly, but his smile didn't falter. Jalen took a breath. You also said I lunged at you. Yet in the video, I'm standing still. It's not a full video, Briggs snapped. You could have moved before the camera started. Could have, Jalen echoed, but didn't. He took a step closer. Isn't it true you never asked what I was doing, that you came at me angry, yelling, and never gave me a chance to speak? Briggs tensed. I did what I had to do. No, Jalen said, eyes locked on him. You did what you always do. You lied. Why are you lying? That was it. Briggs stood. His face darkened. In a flash of rage, he stepped down from the stand, violating court protocol, and marched up to Jalen. You little... Crack. The slap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. The gallery gasped. Several people stood up in shock. Jalen staggered backward, his face turned sharply to the side. His lips split again where the bruise hadn't healed. The judge shot up from his chair. Officer Briggs, step back! Bailiff! The bailiff rushed forward, grabbing Briggs and wrestling him backward. The officer's face was twisted with fury, but he was dragged away as if the weight of the room had finally collapsed on him. Jalen, now breathing heavier, slowly straightened his posture. He touched the side of his mouth with his sleeve, wiped the blood, then looked straight ahead. That's exactly what you did that night, he said, quietly, but with precision. No one moved. The judge's mouth opened, then closed again. For a full 10 seconds, the courtroom was silent. Not even the scratch of a pen or the shifting of a shoe. Every eye was now on Jalen, not as a suspect, but as something entirely different. The courtroom still hung in silence, stunned by the slap that had just occurred. The energy in the room felt suspended, as if even the walls held their breath. Judge McCallum was frozen behind the bench, eyes darting between Jalen and the officer now being restrained by two bailiffs. Spectators stared, mouths agape. Jalen stood alone, blood at the corner of his lip, his spine straight, his eyes calm. Then, without warning, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Every head turned. She stepped in like the stillness after a storm. A black woman in full military uniform, her posture immaculate, her heels clicking in rhythm with certainty. She was not rushed, not flustered, not panicked. She moved with the kind of composed gravity that made people part silently without being asked. Eyes scanned the gold trim on her uniform, the polished insignia on her chest, the sharp precision of every stitch. She radiated command. The room instinctively shifted. Sensing something had changed, she walked straight down the aisle, pausing briefly in front of her son. Her hand rose to gently cup Jalen's bruised cheek. Her voice was soft, intimate. "I'm here now." Jalen closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then she turned toward the judge. "Your Honor," she said, voice firm but calm. "I am Commander Laila Brooks, Defense Intelligence Agency, and I am this young man's mother." The judge leaned forward, the name registering like thunder in his chest. "Commander Brooks," he said, just above a whisper. You're with the DIA." She nodded once. "Retired Special Intelligence, clearance level 5, but today, I'm simply here as a mother." The room buzzed with whispers. The bailiff standing near Briggs let go of his arm, slowly stepping back. Commander Brooks opened the leather folder in her hands and placed a neatly stacked packet on the clerk's desk. "These are GPS logs pulled from his school-registered ID chip and personal device. They show his exact path that evening. This," she tapped a flash drive, "contains unedited, time-stamped footage from a street-facing security camera on the senior center wall. It shows my son helping a fallen woman. No crime, no aggression." Another folder, character statements from his teachers, his chess coach, and the school principal. Letters confirming he left the tournament early to help his grandmother with groceries. Signed, verified. She then turned, slowly, locking eyes with Officer Briggs. "You lied," she said. "You hurt my son. Twice on the street, and again here, in front of the law. But what you forgot," her voice sharpened slightly, "is that the world has eyes now." She gestured to the gallery, to the court recorders, to the cameras that would eventually see this story. "We're not invisible anymore. Our children aren't voiceless. You thought no one would believe him, but you forgot who raised him." She looked at the judge. He didn't need a lawyer. He just needed a chance to be heard. The courtroom fell into silence once more. Only now it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence that comes right before everything changes. The courtroom, stunned into reverence by Commander Brooks' presence and revelations, remained unnervingly quiet until Judge McCallum finally broke the silence. "We're taking a brief recess," he declared, his voice uncharacteristically tense. "I need time to review this evidence. Bailiff, escort Officer Briggs to a holding chamber. He is not to leave this building." A murmur rippled across the gallery. Officer Briggs stiffened as the bailiff gripped his arm, no longer gentle, no longer unsure. For the first time, Briggs didn't look arrogant. He looked small. Judge McCallum rose and retreated to his chambers, the evidence packet and flash drive in hand. The courtroom doors closed behind him. 20 minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Jalen sat silently beside his mother now, the handcuffs finally removed from his wrists. His hands were free, but his posture remained straight, composed. Commander Brooks sat close, one hand resting on his back, a grounding presence. Across the room, Officer Briggs was flanked by 2 armed deputies. He didn't look at Jalen. His face had lost all confidence. When the judge returned, he didn't sit immediately. He remained standing behind the bench, His expression altered, heavier, sobered. He looked out over the courtroom and began slowly. I've reviewed the footage and the documents submitted. The GPS logs are consistent with the defendant's testimony. The security footage, which gives us a wide-angle view of the incident, shows clearly that the young man was assisting an elderly woman who tripped and fell. There was no loitering, no threat, no raised voice, until Officer Briggs escalated the situation. He paused, scanning the room. I'm disturbed by what I witnessed, not just the footage from the alleyway, but what occurred in this courtroom today. A sworn officer on the stand perjured himself. He fabricated key details in a sworn statement. He then physically assaulted a minor in full view of the court, while the boy was exercising his constitutional right to defend himself. He turned toward Briggs, now visibly sweating. This is not just misconduct. It is abuse. It is an affront to the law you claim to uphold. He banged the gavel once, loud, decisive. Officer Briggs, you are hereby placed under arrest for perjury, obstruction of justice, and aggravated assault of a minor inside a courtroom. Gasps and murmurs exploded from the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward without hesitation this time. He pulled Briggs' hands behind his back and cuffed him tightly. The metallic snap echoed as sharply as the slap had. Jalen turned to look, not out of vengeance but quiet recognition. His slapper, the man who had tried to silence him, was now the one being silenced. Briggs was led out through the same doors Jalen had entered from, now stripped of authority, status, and uniformity. Judge McCallum exhaled. He looked at Jalen and finally offered something real in his voice. Mr. Brooks, all charges against you are dismissed, effective immediately. I owe you an apology, both as a judge and a human being. You should have never been here in the first place. Jalen blinked slowly, nodding. Thank you, Your Honor. A beat passed. Then a wave of movement rose in the gallery. One person stood and clapped, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom was on its feet in a standing ovation. Lawyers, teachers, observers, even one security guard by the exit, all of them clapping, not for a victory in court, but for a boy who spoke truth when no one believed he could. Commander Brooks leaned over and kissed the side of her son's head. You did it, she whispered. Jalen smiled faintly, not proud, not boastful, just calm, like someone who had held on to dignity in the storm and had finally reached solid ground. As they walked out together, side by side, a reporter's camera clicked softly. But for once, the flash wasn't blinding, it was witnessing. Days later, the atmosphere inside the city school auditorium was vastly different from the cold tension of the courtroom. The walls were lined with colourful student artwork, banners for academic clubs, and folding chairs filled with students, teachers, and community members. At the centre of the stage stood a simple podium flanked by two chessboards, one of them bearing Jalen's nameplate. Jalen walked into the room in a neat suit that didn't quite fit, borrowed for the occasion, but he wore it with quiet pride. The entire student body rose in applause as he stepped up to the stage. His chess coach, a wiry man with a beard and glasses, smiled proudly beside him, blinking away tears. This young man, the principal announced into the mic, stood alone in a courtroom when no one else would stand for him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't run. He didn't retaliate. He simply spoke. And because he did, the truth came forward. The auditorium erupted in cheers. Members of the chess club surprised Jalen by gifting him a brand new tournament board, signed by all of them. To the calmest mind under pressure, the inscription read, Our King in the Courtroom. On a large screen behind them, local news footage played snippets from the viral courtroom video that had since spread like wildfire online. The clip showed Jalen's face turning after the slap, the hush that followed, and his now famous words. That's exactly what you did that night. It had been aired on every major local channel. The story's headline: Teen defends himself in court after police abuse and wins with dignity. Social media was ablaze. Interviews had been requested, offers made, though Jalen's mother had insisted they keep things quiet. For now, Officer Briggs had been officially suspended pending criminal charges. His badge had been turned in, and the department issued a statement calling his behaviour unacceptable and under investigation. More significantly, Judge McCallum announced the launch of a juvenile case review board, a new initiative to audit cases where minors had been sentenced without proper legal defence. The board would be named in honour of the case that reminded us truth has no age. Jalen's mother, Commander Laila Brooks, stood off to the side, applauding her son with quiet pride. Later in the ceremony, she too was called to the stage. A local city councilwoman presented her with a plaque of recognition for unwavering strength, quiet courage, and the kind of leadership that changes generations. Commander Brooks kept her words short. My son didn't win because I came. He won because he never stopped believing that he mattered, and that made others believe it too. As the assembly closed, Jalen stood in the back hallway, surrounded by classmates he barely knew before. One student nervously stepped up, holding a chess piece, a knight. Can you sign this? He asked. Jalen smiled. Sure, he said. And just like that, the boy who had once stood alone in court became a symbol of what it means to speak with truth, even when you're small, scared, and unheard. In that moment, he wasn't just Jalen the student or Jalen the chess player. He was Jalen, the voice that reminded a city what justice was supposed to look like. The grand chamber of the Senate hearing room was quiet, not with indifference, but with reverence. Rows of polished desks curved around the raised table where Commander Laila Brooks sat, uniform crisp, eyes steady, voice unwavering. The hearing was being televised nationally, a session on police reform, accountability, and juvenile justice. The room was filled with senators, analysts, legal minds, and spectators. But she wasn't speaking as a strategist or commander today. She was speaking as a mother. Behind her, seated among the quiet crowd, was Jalen, older now in demeanour, dressed in a tailored navy suit and narrow tie. His hands were folded in his lap, calm and still. A soft nod of encouragement passed between him and his mother as she was asked to deliver her final words. A senior senator leaned into his mic. Commander Brooks, if you could say one thing to America's youth today, especially those who feel unseen or unheard, what would it be? She paused, not to think, but to let the weight of the question settle. Then she spoke, her voice echoing through the hall and onto the live broadcasts across the country. Raise your children to speak the truth, even when their voice shakes. Then build a world that listens. A hush followed, not out of confusion, but respect. Even the cameras paused in their clicking. She didn't need to elaborate. That single sentence was the blueprint of everything she'd fought for, not only in battlefields overseas, but in the courtroom that day, beside her son. As the hearing adjourned, reporters followed her out. Flashbulbs popped. Jalen stayed in the background, smiling politely, not needing to speak. His presence said everything. Months passed. A modest community centre opened in the same city where everything began. Once an abandoned school gym, now painted with murals of unity, justice, and young voices rising. Inside, a circle of kids sat cross-legged on the floor, notebooks in hand. On one side of the room, a legal rights poster. On the other, chessboards lined up in rows. At the front stood Jalen, no suit, just a plain black shirt and jeans. He moved between the kids with calm confidence, pointing to pieces, asking questions about strategy. Okay, he said with a grin, you're the king, and someone's trying to trap you. What's your move? One kid raised his hand. Fight back. Jalen smiled. Sometimes, but not always. He walked to the whiteboard and wrote a word in bold letters: truth. You don't need power to speak, he told them. You just need truth. Power will follow. The room nodded. A few kids whispered to each other, pointing to their chessboards with new eyes. In the back, a mother watched from the doorway, a baby on her hip. Another observer scribbled notes for a local news piece titled, "The Teen Who Changed the Courtroom." Outside the centre, a mural showed Jalen and his mother standing together, painted in soft golds and deep blues. Beside them were the words,